The first thing I saw was not the missing money. It was the red truck in my daughter's driveway. Brand new, chrome trim, catching the morning light. Tires still clean. Almost theatrical in how clean they were. The kind of clean that says this vehicle has never known rain or mud or the honest use it was supposedly bought for. The exact Ford F-250 my son-in-law Connor had been talking about for 2 years. Always with that hungry, forward-leaning smile that people get when they want a life they have not yet figured out how to earn. I sat in my car for a moment and just looked at it. Then I went home and logged into the investment account my late wife Carol and I had spent 31 years building together. I was checking the balance because my hip surgery had finally been scheduled. 2 years of grinding pain every time I stood from a chair. Every time I walked to the mailbox. Every time I turned over in the night. I had put off the surgery longer than I should have. The way older men do when they convince themselves discomfort is just the price of getting older. But the appointment was confirmed. I needed to see the balance. I expected to see $195,000. Instead, I saw $4,311. I sat at my kitchen table until my coffee went cold. Refreshing the screen the way you do when some part of your brain refuses to accept what your eyes have already read. The numbers did not change. The transaction history sat there like a confession nobody had bothered to hide. 11 withdrawals across 11 days in late March. Every single one just under $10,000. Not random. Not sloppy. Structured. I had spent 26 years investigating insurance fraud. I knew what structured withdrawal patterns looked like. I had written reports about them. I had sat across tables from people who used them, watching their hands while they explained how nothing was as it appeared. And every one of those 11 withdrawals had been authorized through my daughter's access. Before I tell you what I did next, I need you to understand what that account actually was. Carol died in March, 2 years before Connor ever touched that account. Pancreatic cancer. 9 weeks from the first strange stomach pain to the last morning, I held her hand in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and something floral I could never identify. Watching the woman I had loved for 34 years become very still. She was 62 years old. 9 weeks is not long enough to say everything a person should say. It is not long enough to do the things you kept postponing for later. It is barely long enough to understand that there is no later anymore. And that later was always the lie you told yourself to make the present feel less urgent. That was Carol. She was not dramatic about life. She saved grocery coupons in a small drawer beside the stove. She remembered every birthday in the extended family. Not just ours. She made peach cobbler that drew neighbors to our porch with transparent excuses about being in the neighborhood. She could calm a room simply by being calm herself. She never raised her voice at me. Not once in 34 years. Though she was not shy about being honest when I deserved honesty. After she died, the house became quiet in ways I had not known a house could be quiet. Not just the absence of sound. The absence of her specific weight in every room. Her coffee mug stayed in the cabinet. Her reading glasses remained on the little table beside her chair. For months I would still turn my head during the evening news, ready to ask what she thought. And then I would remember, grief is not always a storm. Sometimes it sits beside you like a second person. Quiet and permanent. Having nowhere else to be. The money in that account was not just money. It was 31 years of skipped vacations. It was appliances we repaired instead of replacing. It was old cars driven well past their dignity. It was Carol saying, again and again, that security mattered more than comfort, that people who built carefully could build something lasting. Every deposit had been deliberate. Every year of restraint had been chosen. That was what Connor stole. Not a number. He stole the physical evidence of my wife's patience. Ashley was 33 when it happened. My only daughter. A middle school art teacher with paint on her sleeves most of the time. The kind of teacher who kept granola bars in her desk drawer for students who came to class hungry. Without advertising it or waiting to be thanked, she had Carol's softness. Or at least I believe she did. Connor was different. I had noticed his particular quality early. Not dishonesty. Exactly. More a relationship with reality that felt negotiable. Every few months there was a new idea, a new version of the man he was about to become. A food truck, sports memorabilia, real estate. Some online business he described with the vagueness of a man who had not worked out the details, because the details were not the part that interested him. The part that interested him was other people's belief that he would succeed. He talked about success, the way some people talk about a debt the world owes them. Ashley was patient with his restlessness in a way that made me quietly uneasy. She softened his failures into stories about timing. She translated his recklessness into ambition. She stayed because she believed in the version of him he kept promising to become. I had watched people like Connor for 26 years in my professional life. They usually did not need talent. They only needed access. The account was never supposed to be reachable by Connor. After Carol passed, the administrative reality of death arrived in dense paperwork waves. Death certificates in multiple copies, medical bills in dispute, insurance filings, estate documents, account updates, names to remove, names to add. I was grieving and exhausted, and on a medication that made the edges of everything feel soft and slightly far away. I was not equipped to process all of it alone. So Ashley helped me. For a limited time, I gave her power of attorney over certain financial matters. It was a simple, practical decision. She was my daughter. I trusted her, and I needed someone to help me manage paperwork while I sat in a house that still smelled like Carol and tried to remember how to sleep. That authority was meant to be temporary. It expired. Legally, it did expire. But when the brokerage updated the account records, someone inside their system failed to close Ashley's access properly. A box somewhere stayed checked. A permission stayed active. A door that should have been sealed was left cracked open. And Connor, somehow, found out. I do not know the exact moment. I do not know if Ashley told him directly, or if he found it while leaning over her shoulder at a laptop on a Sunday afternoon. But I know what happened next. Connor saw an open door leading to $195,000 that belonged to a grieving old man who would probably be too broken to notice. He walked through it. I found out on a Thursday morning. I had a hip surgery appointment to confirm. I logged in. I saw $4,311. I refreshed the screen twice. And then I sat very still while my coffee cooled beside the laptop. I drove to Ashley's house without calling first. Connor's truck was in the driveway, gleaming in the Tennessee sun with the specific insult of something very expensive that was not paid for honestly. I sat in the car across the street for a few minutes, thinking about Carol packing lunches so we could save, thinking about every dinner we had cooked at home when we could have gone out, thinking about every vacation she had agreed to postpone. Then I got out and knocked. Ashley opened the door and her face changed the moment she saw mine. Not surprise, not confusion, more the expression of someone who had been expecting this moment while hoping it would keep not arriving. I told her the balance. I said I needed hip surgery. I asked where $190,000 had gone. She started crying. Real tears. I think, but real tears are not the same as innocence. And I was old enough to know the difference. She said it would be okay. She said she loved me. Then she said maybe I should talk to Connor. Her eyes had gone briefly to the hallway when she said it. That small flicker told me everything I needed to know before Connor even walked into the room. He came out with his hands in his pockets and his chin raised. The posture of a man preparing a performance. He said he could explain. He said it had been a family arrangement. Temporary. He had every intention of paying it back. I asked for the paperwork. There was no promissory note. No signed agreement. No email. No text message acknowledging any loan. Nothing. I told him the truth. That is not a loan. Connor, that is theft. He opened his mouth. I turned and walked to my car. 10 days later, my neighbor Gerald called while I was eating breakfast and said he had driven past a new place getting ready to open on 5th Avenue South. A brewery. Big windows. Fresh paint. a grand opening banner already stretched across the front. Then he read me the name, Ridgeline Brewing Company. And below it, printed in clean professional lettering on the glass, was Connor's name listed as one of the founders. I drove there that evening and parked across the street. The building was a converted warehouse, the kind of space young entrepreneurs call rustic and general contractors call expensive. Exposed brick, new lighting, a polished bar visible through the large windows, custom tap handles, a Mountain Ridge logo on the door that someone had clearly paid a designer to create. I sat in my car in the fading light and looked at it for a long time. That was Carol's patience in those walls. That was my hip surgery in that tap system. That was 31 years of small, deliberate savings turned into a grand opening banner with Connor's name on it. Connor had not borrowed from me. He had built himself a monument with my wife's life savings. That night, I did not drive back to the brewery and make a scene. I did not call Connor and scream. I did not call Ashley and beg her to explain. All of those things might have satisfied something for 5 minutes. None of them would have gotten me anything back. I knew how fraud worked. For 26 years, I had followed paper trails. I had watched liars cry convincingly. I had watched thieves construct elaborate confusion around simple theft. I had watched desperate people turn bad decisions into complicated stories, hoping complexity would create doubt. And the first rule, always, was the same. Do not chase emotion. Chase facts. I went home, opened my laptop, and started a new document. At the top, I typed the date. Then I built a timeline. Carol's death, the power of attorney, the brokerage access, the first withdrawal, the 11th withdrawal, the truck, the brewery, Connor's explanation at the door, Ashley's eyes going to the hallway. No interpretation. No adjectives. Just the sequence of facts. Then I called Raymond Chu, the attorney who had handled Carol's estate. He listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, he told me what I had expected to hear. Civil recovery was possible. Criminal prosecution would be harder, because the expired power of attorney created just enough technical fog for Connor to hide inside. But Raymond gave me something better than a courtroom. He gave me the name of a forensic accountant, Diane Presley. She did not comfort me when we met. She opened a spreadsheet. I respected that immediately. Diane did not need much time. She laid Connor's financial life out in numbers. And numbers do not blush when they expose a liar. His last tax return showed $48,000 from a technology support job. Ashley made roughly $52,000 as a teacher. Together, roughly $100,000 before taxes. Respectable. Not brewery money. Not new truck money. Not custom renovation. Designer branding. Lease deposit. Brewing equipment. And opening inventory money. Using public permit filings, contractor rate estimates, and photographs I had taken through the brewery windows. Diane built a range. The renovation alone looked like somewhere between $140,000 and $180,000. The truck, based on the trim level and the sticker still visible through the windshield in one of my photos, was another $68,000. In less than 60 days, Connor had spent somewhere between $210,000 and $250,000. No business loan on record. No private investor documentation. No inheritance. No savings history that could account for anything close to that amount. Diane looked at the spreadsheet, then at me. Where does money like that come from? We both already knew the answer. But knowing is not enough. I needed paper. The money was not the only thing Connor took. Carol had a small velvet-lined jewelry case on her dresser. Not a collection that would impress anyone at an appraisal, but the kind that carries more weight than market value. A pair of garnet earrings from her grandmother. A gold filigree bracelet that had passed through 4 generations of women in Carol's family. An Art Deco brooch from the 1930s that Carol used to hold in her palm sometimes. Quietly, like she was listening to something in it that I could not hear. After she died, I could not bring myself to move that case. For 14 months, it sat exactly where she had left it, on the dresser in our bedroom. One of the small, unchangeable things I used as evidence that she had existed. After I discovered the account, I went looking for it. I found it in Ashley's spare bedroom, sitting open on a shelf, half empty. I stood in that room and did not move for what felt like a long time. The garnet earrings were still there. The brooch was gone. The bracelet was gone. 2 other pieces were missing. When I asked Ashley, she would not look at me directly. She said Connor had borrowed a few pieces to have them appraised for insurance purposes. It was the kind of explanation you offer when you are too tired to make the lie any better. Later, I confirmed it through a Nashville antique jewelry dealer. A brooch matching Carol's description had been sold weeks earlier by a man in his 30s. Connor had not only drained our savings, he had turned my wife's family history into cash. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not loudly. Not with a dramatic internal declaration. I did not feel rage. Exactly. Or at least not the hot, impulsive kind. What I felt was colder and slower. Like something heavy settling permanently into the chest and deciding to stay. I thought about Carol's grandmother wearing that brooch in 1931. I thought about every woman who had kept it safe before it reached Carol's hands. I thought about Connor walking into a shop and trading a piece of my family's history for whatever. That was when I stopped thinking like a grieving father-in-law. I started thinking the way I had thought for 26 years. Connor believed he had taken money from a broken old man too deep in grief to fight back. He believed family loyalty would keep the truth soft and uncertain. He had miscalculated on both counts. The first crack in Connor's wall came from taxes. Raymond discovered, while pulling public records related to Connor's business registration, that Connor had been careless long before he touched my account. For tax years, 2021 and 2022, he had outstanding balances with both state and federal authorities. Not headline amounts. $11,240. Plus accrued penalties and interest. To Connor, it was probably another bill shoved in a drawer. Another responsibility to handle after his next idea finally made him the man he kept promising to become. But debt has memory. Raymond explained that certain outstanding tax obligations could be legally purchased by private investors. The buyer pays the obligation, becomes the creditor, earns statutory interest. And, if the debtor fails to pay within the allowed period, can pursue collection through liens against personal or business assets. He watched my face while he explained this. I told him to form an LLC. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would put my name in front of Connor before the timing was right. Raymond suggested Blue Ridge Consulting LLC. I told him that was fine. He registered it with me as the sole member. Himself as the registered agent. His office as the mailing address. Then Blue Ridge Consulting LLC purchased Connor's outstanding tax obligation. From that moment forward, Connor owed me money. He just did not know it yet. Nothing about any of this was hidden from the law. Public records, legal procedures, proper filings. Every step was documented. The only thing I withheld from Connor was the name behind the company. Because a creditor is not legally obligated to identify the human being behind an LLC to the person who owes the money. I waited. This is the part people underestimate. Waiting is not passive. In fraud work, most people lose because they move too soon. They want the confrontation. They want the admission. They want the satisfying scene where the guilty person drops their performance and says, "Yes, I did it. You were right." Real life almost never delivers that scene on your preferred schedule. So I let Connor keep building his dream. The grand opening came in early May. I drove past Ridgeline twice that day. The parking lot was full both times. String lights in the windows. Music from inside. People standing in a short line to get in. I could have walked through that door and told every person in that room exactly what their bar stools were built with. Instead, I drove home, watched baseball highlights, and went to bed before 10. Over the following weeks, I monitored the brewery from a comfortable distance. Social media posts, customer photographs, event nights, a canned beer launch. Connor announcing merchandise. Connor hinting at expansion. A man performing prosperity for whoever was watching. That mattered. Because the deeper he invested, the more he had to lose when the walls began to close. Every dollar he poured back into that building was a dollar that made the eventual math more painful for him. 2 weeks after the opening, Ashley invited me to dinner. I had been avoiding most of her calls. She had come to my porch twice with red eyes and a soft voice, saying she missed me, saying she hated how strange everything felt. Some of it was genuine. Some of it was performance. By that point, I no longer trusted my own ability to tell the difference, which was its own kind of grief. But I went. I brought a bottle of wine. I sat at their table. I ate the chicken Ashley had prepared and listened while Connor talked about the brewery the way some people give interviews no one requested. First weekends had been huge. The IPA was becoming their signature. A seasonal wheat was coming. A food truck partnership was being discussed. 2 new employees, possibly before summer ended. I nodded. I asked polite questions. I let him feel successful. Then I asked, casually, how he had structured his supplier contracts, whether he had fixed pricing locked in or was working month to month. His smile shifted slightly, not enough for a stranger to notice. I mentioned, just in passing, that I understood a little about small business accounting from my years in fraud investigation. That was when Connor's body language changed. Just enough. His shoulders pulled inward almost imperceptibly. His hand moved to his glass. His eyes went briefly to Ashley. Ashley looked at her plate. There it was. Not a confession. Not proof for a courtroom. But confirmation I did not need proof for. They both knew exactly what was sitting at the table with them. I finished my meal, thanked Ashley for the food, and left before dessert. On the drive home, I kept seeing Ashley's face in the moment Connor looked at her. She had not looked confused. She had not looked surprised. She had looked like a woman who already knew the answer to every question I might ever ask, and was praying I would stop asking. That was the part that cost me the most sleep. Connor was a thief. I understood thieves. But Ashley was my daughter. She had sat at Carol's kitchen table as a small child and painted crooked suns on construction paper, bringing them to her mother with absolute confidence that they were beautiful. Carol had hung every single one of them, and now Ashley was sitting beside a man who had sold her dead mother's brooch. And she was choosing quiet. I could file that in a folder and let the law handle Connor. The wound with Ashley did not have a form to fill out. The next move was procedural. On a Sunday afternoon in early June, I sat at my desk and completed IRS Form 3949A, the Citizen Referral for Suspected Tax Fraud. I had used forms like this before in my professional life. I had never typed a family member's name into one. I wrote the facts plainly. $195,000 removed from a third-party investment account over 11 days. Each transaction structured just below the automatic reporting threshold. The sudden formation of a new business, the expensive renovation, the new truck, the complete absence of any documented funding source that could account for the money. Then I included the jewelry, not for emotional effect, but because a man willing to convert a dead woman's heirlooms into untraceable cash was a man who understood the concept of hiding money. When I submitted the form, there was no satisfying sound effect. A confirmation page appeared. My printer hummed. I filed the receipt and added one line to my timeline. Then I closed the laptop and made dinner. By mid-July, the pressure had begun arriving at Connor's door. Ashley called on a Thursday evening. Her voice had that particular tightness people develop when they are trying very hard to sound calm, and the effort is obvious. She asked about my hip. She asked about the weather. She asked 3 small, careful questions before arriving at the 4th one. She told me Connor had received a letter from the IRS. They were requesting documentation about large financial transfers connected to the new business. Source of capital, bank records, investor agreements, anything that could demonstrate where the startup funding had come from. Connor was furious. She said, He believed someone had reported him. He was calling it harassment. He had already contacted an attorney. I let the silence sit between us. Then I said IRS inquiries did sometimes arrive for new businesses that showed rapid growth, and that Connor should simply provide whatever documents supported his explanation. I said it gently, almost kindly, because we both knew what documents he did not have. No legitimate investor agreement, no business loan record, no savings trail going back years, no paper that could transform stolen retirement money into honest startup capital. When we hung up, I opened my file and added 2 words below the last entry. Phase 2. By early August, the answers Connor could not provide were becoming visible in their absence. The IRS had requested documentation and received none that worked. No steady savings accumulation. No loan proceeds. No investor transfer. No inheritance. Just a household earning roughly $100,000 annually that had suddenly made the kind of capital investment associated with people who earn 4 times that. The agent also noted the withdrawal pattern from my brokerage. 11 transactions, each deliberately kept just below the reporting threshold. Connor had apparently believed that made him clever. In my experience, it actually made the pattern easier to identify. Structured withdrawals are not discrete. They are a signature. Raymond updated me that the IRS had assessed taxes, penalties, and interest approaching $40,000. With legal fees, Connor's total exposure was significantly higher. Then Connor tried to borrow his way out of it. 2 banks declined. Then more followed. The truck loan had already strained his credit. The brewery was too new to support another line. His suppliers were beginning to notice slow payments. Ridgeline Brewing was still filling tables on weekends. But the money behind the walls was borrowed. And the walls were starting to lean. For the first time since he walked through my door to explain the theft, Connor needed money that no one was willing to give him. That was the moment I knew he was stretched thin enough. That was when Blue Ridge Consulting sent its first letter. Raymond drafted it in the kind of language lawyers use when they are carrying something sharp inside formal courtesy. Every sentence was correct. Every sentence was aimed. The letter informed Connor that his outstanding state and federal tax obligations from 2021 and 2022 had been legally acquired by Blue Ridge Consulting LLC. The total amount due, including statutory interest and administrative costs. It was $12,800. Payment was required within 30 days. Failure to pay would trigger collection proceedings, including potential liens against personal and business assets. Raymond sent it certified mail. Signature required. Connor signed for it on a Tuesday morning. That same evening, Ashley called. She was not performing anymore. No practice softness. Just fear with nowhere to put itself. She said some company had purchased Connor's old tax debt. She said they were demanding money they did not have. She said Connor thought it was connected to the IRS matter. Like someone was coming at them from multiple directions simultaneously. Then she paused. Then she asked if I had ever heard of a company called Blue Ridge Consulting. I looked at the folder on my desk. No, I said. The name does not mean anything to me. After we hung up, I sat in the dark study for a while. I did not feel joyful. Not exactly. What I felt was the particular quiet satisfaction of watching a long, careful equation begin to balance itself out. Connor came to my house the following Tuesday. I saw him through the front window before he reached the porch. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. One hand holding the Blue Ridge letter like it had personally wronged him. I opened the door before he could knock. That startled him. He said he knew the company was mine. He said he had hired someone to trace the registration. He said I was targeting him, destroying everything he had built, and that his attorney was preparing a civil lawsuit. I let him finish. Then I told him what I knew. I told him I knew about the account. I knew about the 11 withdrawals. I knew about the truck and the brewery and the jewelry. I knew the brooch had belonged to Carol's grandmother. I knew he had sold it. And I told him I knew he had sat at our dinner table 2 months earlier, looked me in the eye, and talked about his IPA with the confidence of a man who had never stolen anything. His anger changed shape in his face. It became something smaller and colder. He said he could not pay $12,800. I said, 30 days. He started talking about his cash flow, his obligation, his attorney. I said, 30 days. Again. Then I closed the door. The next 3 weeks were exactly what I had expected from a man like Connor. He did not pause and think clearly. Pride had always been his most expensive habit, and it became expensive now. He hired a private investigator to build a harassment case against me. The investigator found nothing. There was nothing to find. I had not followed him, threatened him, or interfered with his business. I had used public records, legal filings, and tax procedure to do exactly what any creditor was legally entitled to do. He met with a litigation attorney about suing me. That attorney apparently told him what I already knew: purchasing a valid debt is legal. Reporting suspected financial fraud is legal. And refusing to rescue someone from the consequences of their own theft is also legal. After that, Connor tried the banks again. 4 applications, 4 rejections. He attempted to refinance the truck and discovered the loan-to-value math had turned against him. The truck that was supposed to announce his arrival had become another anchor. Even his most visible symbol of success had become debt with chrome trim. Then Ashley called me. This time there was no careful framing, no softness designed for a particular effect. Just a woman who had run out of ways to explain to herself what she already knew. She said she had not understood the full extent of it. She said Connor had told her it was only a temporary arrangement. She said she had believed him because she had wanted the life he kept promising. I listened until she was finished. Then I said the hardest true thing I had left to say to her. Choosing not to know is still a choice. She cried quietly. Then she asked if I could help them. I told Ashley there was one path I could offer. Not rescuing Connor from consequences. Not pretending the theft had been a misunderstanding. Just one clean exit before the law took everything from him in pieces. That evening, Connor called. His voice was different. Smaller. The performance had finally exhausted itself. I made him an offer. I would purchase Ridgeline Brewing Company for the appraised market value of its assets. Equipment. Lease rights. Remaining inventory. Whatever retained real value. My estimate, based on Diane's work, was $85,000. In exchange, I would forgive the Blue Ridge debt, stop the collection action, and not pursue the civil recovery case Raymond had been building. But I needed one document, not a criminal confession, an acknowledgement, a written statement that $195,000 had been transferred from my investment account without my authorization and used to capitalize the brewery. Connor was quiet. Then he said $85,000 was an insult. He said Ridgeline was worth at least twice that. He said I was trying to take his business while accusing him of taking from me. The irony of that sentence passed right over his head, the way useful truths usually did. I told him the offer expired at midnight. He did not take it. That was the part I had anticipated. Though a small, tired portion of me had hoped he might surprise me. Pride is expensive, and men like Connor insist on paying full price. The day before the deadline, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. I knew it was him because it read like everything he said and did. Too many excuses. Not enough ownership. And not one actual apology anywhere in it. He asked for 60 more days. He said Ashley was falling apart. He said I was destroying a family over money. Over money. I read that line 3 times. 31 years of Carol saying later, when we're safer. 31 years of postponed comfort in exchange for security. And the man who had stolen it wanted to frame me as someone who valued money over family. I did not reply. At midnight, the deadline passed. At 8 the following morning, I called Raymond. Start collection. The hearing came 22 days later. I wore the Navy suit I had worn to Carol's funeral, though I tried not to think about that when I put it on. Raymond met me in the courthouse parking lot with a leather folder and the calm expression of someone who had brought enough paper to win. Connor and Ashley were already inside. Ashley did not look at me. Connor looked thinner in some way that was not about weight. The way people look when sleep has stopped doing its job. His attorney argued hardship, business viability, disproportionate impact on a young enterprise. He presented the case for breathing room with the kind of practiced sympathy that courtrooms mostly see through. Raymond did not argue emotion. He presented documents, the debt purchase, the certified notices, the deadlines Connor had been given, the legal standing of Blue Ridge Consulting LLC. Every step had been clean. Every paper had been filed in sequence. Every deadline had been communicated. And the responses to each deadline had been documented. The hearing officer reviewed the file and approved the collection action. If Connor did not pay within 15 days, business assets could be seized and liquidated. Connor stood up too quickly when the ruling was read. His attorney touched his arm. Ashley put her face in her hands. I sat very still and felt almost nothing move inside me at all. Connor did not pay. 15 days passed. No check. No settlement offer. No private investor arriving at the last possible moment. His attorney sent one more letter requesting an extension. Raymond answered with 2 sentences and a copy of the ruling. Then the liquidation began. The word sounds cleaner than the reality. In practice, it means strangers arrive and begin assigning numbers to the things you built. The brewing equipment was listed. The tap system, the custom bar fixtures, the remaining inventory, the lease rights, even the Ridgeline name and logo. Because Connor had managed to build just enough local recognition for the brand to carry some residual value. I attended the sale. Connor was there, standing near the back with his arms folded, watching other people put prices on the thing he had built with stolen money. Ashley was not with him. By then, even she had started understanding that loyalty and love are not the same thing as walking into a fire with the person who lit the match. The final bid came in at $94,000. Mine. No one else went higher. Ridgeline came with deferred lease payments. Uncertain books. A business owner under active IRS investigation. And the general scent of disaster that serious buyers could identify from across a room. To everyone else, it was a risky acquisition with too many unknowns. To me, it was the shape of consequence. I signed the papers. The brewery Connor built with Carol's savings no longer belonged to Connor. I never wanted to operate a brewery. That was never the point. The day the transfer was finalized, Raymond asked what I intended to do with the space, the equipment, and the name Connor had paid to put on the window. I told him the name could disappear along with Connor's version of the business. I had no interest in preserving a monument built on theft. A few weeks later, I leased the space to a woman named Carla Deming. Carla had spent years as a head brewer at a larger regional operation. She understood the craft and the numbers and the parts of small business ownership that require unglamorous discipline. She did not talk about destiny or legacy. She talked about fermentation schedules, supplier relationships, lease terms, and payroll. She had no tolerance for vague ambition. She paid fair market rent. She renamed the place. She stripped Connor's logo from the door and rebuilt from a foundation that was actually honest. The first time I drove past after she reopened, the parking lot was full. The building had survived Connor. His name had not. The final accounting was not a perfect circle. People want justice to be clean. They wanted to restore things exactly. Real justice is rarely that neat. Of the original $195,000, I recovered approximately $79,000 net from the brewery liquidation. After Raymond's fees, Diane's work, and the costs of the legal process. Not enough. But something. The larger recovery came from the brokerage. Raymond built a negligence case around 2 specific failures. First, they had not properly closed Ashley's access after the power of attorney expired. Second, their internal systems had not flagged the structured withdrawal pattern. 11 transactions deliberately kept just below the reporting threshold across 11 consecutive days. That was the kind of pattern that automated monitoring systems are specifically designed to catch. They had not caught it. The brokerage settled for $110,000 without admitting liability. which is the institutional way of paying to avoid having a judge examine the documents in open court. Between the brewery and the settlement, I recovered approximately $189,000 of the original $195,000. On paper, that was close to whole. Carol's brooch never came back. Neither did the bracelet. Some losses do not have a settlement amount because no one can agree on what they were actually worth. And the real answer is that they were not worth anything expressible in money. Connor filed for personal bankruptcy 4 months after the liquidation. I will not pretend that news brought no reaction, but it was not satisfaction. It was more like the quiet that arrives when a long rain finally stops and you step outside to see what it took with it. Ashley separated from Connor before the hearing. She filed for divorce in the fall. She called me twice during that period. I answered both times. The first call was mostly crying. The second was quieter. She told me she had started seeing a therapist. She said she was trying to understand. Honestly, why she had chosen not to ask the question she already knew the answer to. She did not ask me to forgive her. Maybe she had finally understood that forgiveness is not something a parent can produce on request because their child is in pain. I did not make it easy for her, but I did not make it impossible. She is my daughter. That fact survived what she did, though it came out damaged in ways I am still assessing. My hip was replaced in January. The surgery went well, better than I had expected given how long I had waited. The first morning, I walked across the kitchen without planning each step around the pain. I stopped at the counter and stood still for a moment. Carol's photograph was on the end table in the living room, the one from Asheville. She is laughing in it, looking slightly away from the camera, like someone had just said something perfect and ridiculous at the same moment. I have tried many times to remember what made her laugh that particular afternoon. I cannot. But I remember the sound. I remember how her shoulders moved when she really laughed. I remember the way she would press one hand to her chest. Like joy had genuinely surprised her. That was what Connor never understood. He thought he had taken money. He thought this was a story about numbers. But that account was Carol. It was both of us. It was 34 years of marriage and 31 years of careful, patient saving. It was the life she had protected with her quiet discipline. Right up until 9 weeks of illness took her away before she could ever spend a dollar of it on herself. I did not get everything back, but I used what I had. Paper, patience, law, proof, and I made sure he could not keep what he had stolen. Some endings do not feel like victory. They feel like silence. The long, earned kind. By November, the leaves in Tennessee had turned brown at the edges, and the evenings came early. I sat on my back porch one afternoon while the sun dropped behind the trees, and the yard turned that deep blue that only lasts a few minutes before dark. The air smelled like dry leaves and wood smoke from somewhere down the block. I sat there and thought about all of it. About Ashley's eyes when Connor looked at her at that dinner table. About Carol's brooch, gone forever into a stranger's collection. About the strange arithmetic of recovering nearly everything that could be measured while knowing some things cannot be measured at all. That is the part people do not explain when they talk about betrayal. Justice can close a case. It cannot always close the wound. I used the law. I followed the paper. I recovered nearly everything that could be assigned a dollar value. But families are not balance sheets. And some debts cannot be collected in any currency that actually matters. All I know is this. I did not destroy Connor. I simply stopped protecting him from what he had already done to himself. When the last of the light went out of the yard, I stood up slowly, went inside, and locked the door behind me. Carol would have forgiven him faster than I could. She always was the better of the two of us. But she also would have said you cannot forgive someone who has not asked. And Connor never did. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Would you have confronted them the day you found out? Or would you have waited and built the case the slow way? And if you have ever watched karma arrive for someone who thought they had gotten away with it, tell me about it below. Subscribe if you want more quiet, patient, completely true stories about betrayal, evidence, and the kind of justice that does not need to raise its voice.